Welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode 16. My name is Matt, and this is a weekly podcast where I review multiple platforms and technologies to see which works best for you. In today's episode, I'm going to take a look at the digital audio workstation called Ardour, and I'm going to discuss some recent comments that I've made about open source software. So over the last week or so, I've thought quite a bit about what I wanted my next episode to discuss. And recently I've made a lot of comments encouraging people to try different variations of Linux, if it was something that they might be interested in. And I also made several comments about the fact that I use what I think works best for me, and that usually as a musician, what works best in a production environment for a musician usually tends to be Apple products. And with using Apple products or Apple hardware comes the price. And I mentioned that I had a specific type of connection that I needed in order to be able to record music or these podcasts, and that connection is a FireWire connection. And on my Apple device, my Mac computer, I'm using a FireWire cable connected to a Thunderbolt port, and that seems to work just fine. And I also mentioned that if I had a FireWire connection on my other Linux computer, then I would probably be using Linux more for everything that I do. And as I started thinking about all of these different projects that I've been getting into, one of the things that I have thought about doing is switching my workflow a little bit. And how I normally make these podcasts is I use software put out by Presonus, because that's the software that came with my mixer. I use a Presonus mixer for all of my recording, and the Presonus software is pretty good. It doesn't do everything that I need it to do. It does a good job with recording all the tracks. It makes it very easy to record multiple tracks at once. But I often, especially this podcast, or if I'm doing video tutorials, what I will do is I will record my audio in Presonus Capture, that's the name of the software, and then I import it into another Presonus software for editing called Studio One. And then from there, Studio One doesn't offer a whole lot of different things for me to do. Just with the free version that I get from them. So then I export that into Audacity, and I do a few more things, and which I export from Audacity to the final product of my release. And it does a good job of getting everything done that I need as far as recording. However, I was starting to think about some of the comments that I made last week about, if I had a FireWire port on my other computers, then I would be able to record using open source software on Linux. And I had this thought in my brain that I don't really need to be on a Linux computer to do that, because I know there's open source software for Mac that does basically the same thing. So what I've decided to take on a project this week is I wanted to step into something called Ardour. And what Ardour is, it is a digital audio workstation for Mac and for Linux. And I've had it on my computer for a long time, and I've just barely begun to scratch the surface on what it can do. And from the looks of it, just for what I've used over the last week or so, the workstation itself is much more powerful than Audacity. And what I don't like about Audacity, and I do like a lot of the features in Audacity, and I use it quite often, but as far as editing goes, editing in Audacity is pretty cumbersome. It's not as easy as other things to edit, and that could be just the workflow that I'm used to. And what I wanted to do is experiment with Ardour and see how easy it is to edit recordings using Ardour. So taking a look at some of these features, you get unlimited multi-channel tracks, which is great. My mixer is a 16-channel mixer, but if I ever were to upgrade, I would be able to continue to use Ardour in the future. I can import various plugins. I can use different file formats, WAV formats, FLAC formats, and I'm able to use Apple loops, GarageBand loops. I'm able to go browse through for samples from things like freesound.org if I wanted to do some mixing. The editing looks very powerful. It's non-destructive and non-linear. That's a great thing to have as far as editing is concerned. So looking at Ardour, it's very similar to what I've been using. Just at some of the features, I didn't know that you can import video. You can actually import a single video and export the soundtrack from it using this audio editing software, which I think is kind of neat because sometimes I do that for various projects that I'm working on. It has mixing capabilities, and basically everything that I have had in other audio, professional audio recording models, I am able to use in Ardour. So this is sort of an experiment, and I wanted to put out a podcast using only open source software because I sort of advocate for it from week to week. And if I can start off switching my workflow from something that is put out by Presonus, that in this case, actually Presonus is providing this for free because I purchased a mixer from them. They also have a step-up model where you can purchase more advanced software from them. It's not open source software, but it is free. And my goal here is to start off recording these podcasts with Ardour. And as I sort of gain experience with Ardour and what its capabilities are, then I may, in a few weeks or months, take the leap and start using this in a production environment where I am recording live music using Ardour once I sort of gain the confidence that this software can handle everything that I throw at it. There's a lot of things that I need. First of all, it's got to be easy. When I'm going to throw this in a production environment, I need things to work without any complications whatsoever. I need channels to be recognized right off the bat, whether or not that means I need to go in and pre-program everything and then save as a template. That would be an option to get all 16 channels working as soon as I open up the file itself to start recording. That's something that I need to look into. I also need this to be rock solid. I don't want system crashes or anything like that as I'm using. Sometimes Audacity has been known to crash on me in the past. So I need it to be rock solid. I need it to be able to record for hours without interruptions or problems. So just by looking at the Ardour website, there is other things that you can do. You can pan channels. You can set the tracks to automate, just like you would in any other audio workstation. I haven't experimented a lot with plugins, but if I can just, in the future, use several very basic plugins. I need a compressor. I need EQ. I need silence truncators. I need to remove background noise sometimes. Really, it's only a handful of plugins that I would use in Audacity. And if I can combine all of my workflow into one piece of software, that's going to save me lots of time. And for those of you who are musicians out there, if you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on recording software when you're just doing basic tasks, Ardour might be a very popular choice for you. Ardour is available for Mac right now and Linux. As far as I know, there is a Windows version in the works, and it should be coming out fairly soon. You can actually download the beta, but I'm sure that's buggy at this point. So Ardour is free for a certain extent. They allow you to have a trial version. That's what I'm doing here. I'm using the trial version. You can pay as little as $1 for it. Or you can jump on a subscription plan where you're getting constant updates. You're constantly getting new things for a few dollars a month if you wanted to do that. So the thought here, again, is I physically am not capable of using my recording equipment right now on Linux. But in the meantime, I'm sort of still advocating for the open source software, and I'm using it as best as I can. So this is sort of an experimental podcast so that I can see what it sounds like after a few minutes of just talking on the microphone and seeing where I can go with this software. So this is a very basic introduction to Ardour. I would love to get into it more in the future. The one thing that I didn't want to do today, I didn't want to get into the whole WWDC event that happened this week. And I try not to do that because all the news and media online are all talking about WWDC and all of the latest and greatest things coming out from Apple this week. I tend to steer away from that because everything just gets buried. And I wanted to bring up something that I know a lot of people that I work with would find useful. So if you're somebody who uses Audacity and you're looking for something that's a little more feature rich and a little more powerful, then I think Ardour would be great for you. It looks great. Ardour looks like professional software. To me, using Audacity is meant to run on very low-end computers. And to me, it still looks the same as it did back in the early 2000s when it first came out. I'm not exactly sure when it came out per se, but Audacity looks very old to me. And Ardour looks modern. It looks powerful. There is a learning curve to it. For instance, trying to get everything up and running for this morning's podcast, I did have to learn a few things on how to set it up correctly, which I was expecting. I wasn't really expecting everything to work flawlessly without any some sort of pre-setup that I needed to go through. So, looking at this over the last few weeks, I think Ardour is something that I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to in the next coming months. And if this is something that can become a tool that I use in production, I'm going to be set for a long time. The objective here is to combine multiple workflows into one environment. So instead of going from PreSonus Capture to PreSonus Studio One to Audacity to publication, I can edit everything in one piece of software and be done in less time. And time is important to me. I don't want to be spending hours and hours and hours mixing and editing and then exporting and re-importing and exporting and re-importing. So if you've used Ardour before, send me a message on how it works for you. How do you use it? What are your use cases? I'd like to know more about it and if anybody has tried Ardour before. And we're going to see how this turns out. We're going to see how easy it is, and maybe next week I will just briefly talk about how editing in Ardour happens and what my experience was with that. And we'll see if I can continue on with this. There's a couple other topics that I sort of wanted to get into today, and I know they're not related, but as this podcast is happening, I'm sort of waiting. In just a couple hours, there's another SpaceX launch that's happening. And if you would have asked me a year ago if this were something I would be really interested in, it would be something that I was interested in, but not really a big fan of. I wouldn't be counting down to these launches. But this past year has been sort of a year that has been bringing me all over the place. It's really interesting that sometime back in October, I believe, maybe even a little later than that, I read a book on Elon Musk, and I read a book about his trials from going from PayPal, creating something before PayPal, to acquiring PayPal, and then selling PayPal and using his fortune to create SpaceX and Tesla. and almost going broke, and now he's got two booming industries, I think is absolutely incredible. On top of that is creating a future for us. Where I live locally, there are Tesla charging stations that are being built for these Tesla cars to be able to travel across the country and recharge. So they're creating routes across the country so that these cars can recharge when they need to recharge and not use fossil fuels, which is kind of cool. And at the same time, he is modernizing the space industry, and every time that they land one of these rockets, they're saving about $60 million if they can reuse these rockets in the future. That's pretty amazing. So I want to support that, and I want to acknowledge that we are living in the future. It's kind of cool to see all this stuff. So I'm waiting on these rocket launches, and I think there's also another company out there called Blue Origin that's also doing the same thing. That company is owned by Jeff Bezos from Amazon. So if you ever watch my Facebook page posts, a lot of times I'm posting when the next launch webcast is, just as a way to if anybody else is interested in that type of technology, you'll know where to find those, and maybe eventually you'll be able to find it on your own. So this podcast normally is geared towards computer software and towards technologies that we can use in our house. But sometimes we have to take a look outside that perspective and see what's going on in the world so that in the future we can, we might be able to be a part of that. The idea is I want to start using and reviewing a couple of different things in the next weeks and months and discuss them on the show that these companies are using. For instance, the International Space Station, which SpaceX is currently providing resupply operations to the space station. The space station uses different variations of Linux. I want to review something called Scientific Linux in a few weeks. That is a setup for scientists to be able to conduct experiments, and that's used mostly in the science community to have a system where it's all the same so that scientists can then use this and have discussions on whatever project that they are working on, and they're all using the same sort of setup, their same software for all the experiments that they need to do in whatever field that they're in. So it does relate in a very broad sense of the term. They're trying new technologies to innovate and reduce costs and create competition for the future. And they're trying to make things easier to use, easier to run, easier to manage. And here in the same way in this podcast, I'm also doing the same thing. I'm trying to constantly make the audio better. I'm making audio tweaks. I'm trying to change my workflow a little bit so it's not so time consuming. It runs a little bit better. Maybe in the future, the sound quality will be better because of the changes that I'm making. I can spend a little bit more time working on something in one particular element rather than using multiple elements. And hopefully, the technologies will get better as time goes on. The software that I'm using will get better and create a better listening experience. So it's nice to see these companies who are trying to improve rather than be stagnant and do the same thing that's been going on for 60 years. With a lot of other companies out there, a lot of other companies, they don't want the competition, such as the United Launch Alliance. They don't feel competition is a good thing. They had all of the contracts before, and for instance, with ULA, their launches cost $380 million per launch for the government. And with SpaceX, it's around $90 million. So every time that there is a launch with SpaceX, it's saving taxpayer money. They're basically getting another free satellite in that process. A satellite costs, a third of the overall launch. So it's pretty amazing that these companies, yes, they're creating a business model where they can survive and they can make money, but they're also doing things differently. They're trying new things, and that's what we should all be doing. We should all be trying new things and trying to learn constantly and trying to make our lives better in whatever way that we can. I think that's really important. So if you're a person that is interested in these type of things, let me know. You could send me some feedback. I would love some feedback on the shows. I know this episode was a little geared more towards something that I'm doing, but maybe you'll give Ardour a shot and see what it can do for you. And if you do that, let me know. Send me some feedback. You can check out my Facebook page, MrpTechreviews. You can also email me, mrptechreviews@gmail.com. And send me feedback. Give me ideas for future shows. I do have a few things in the works, like I always do, but I'm always welcome to take a turn here or there for anybody who wants some information on certain things. So with that said, I'm going to go watch the SpaceX launch now, and I will see you all next time. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.